Okay, welcome back to the Forest stage here at ETH Barcelona. Are you guys having a good time? Hooray! It's Friday afternoon, it's almost finished, and I hope you guys have been having an amazing, amazing time. So we have a really great panel coming up for you guys. It is the impact of reputation protocols. And the people on the panel are over here to my left. It's Ashley Taylor-Buck from Resource, Andre Berlin from Deep Work, Livia Deschermeyer from Common Stack, Artur Daliarsky, yes, got it, okay, cool, from Ceramic, and it is moderated by Simona Ravaioli, yes. Okay, come on up and let's do the panel.
Would be nice to have your beers up here.
It's time.
Time. Check. All right, here you go, David. Cheers, everyone.
Can we have 4 more, please?
Upvote on your reputation, David. All right. Yeah.
All right.
So I guess we need 3 more.
Cheers.
Anyone? All right, cheers again. So how's everyone doing? Are you all up for kind of continuing with these good vibes for the rest of your life? Yeah? So we gather here with a very interesting collection of humans coming from different walks of life, trying to kind of share the way we've all been thinking about reputation, which can easily get degenerative. And so I guess our approach here today would be to say, how can we think about that and design better reputational systems, things that likely would need to become regenerative. And I guess a good way to kick things off, I thought, was to kind of go back to my friends here and ask them, what's their reputation? What do people know them for in real life? And maybe that's also kind of a way for them to tell you a bit more about themselves. Ashley, would you like to go first?
Sure. People know that I love astrology. No, but really, I love learning new things. I got interested in alternative currencies and ways to create social impact with building new systems. And the blockchain space was a natural fit for me early on. And I would also say people know of me as someone who's not afraid to go against the grain.
All right. I've been thinking about this, of course, before the panel, and I think I actually have more than one, because I tend to have interests that involve participating in groups that don't necessarily overlap with each other. So I think my friends hopefully know me as somebody who is loves to joke and have fun, but is also very passionate about social issues and political issues. I hope that my coworkers think that I'm a hard worker and I can deliver. Yeah, and I also just listen to lots and lots and lots of podcasts and audiobooks, and I think that this is kind of the only part of my reputation that is actually available online, because otherwise I'm not super active on social media, but you can look up my list of recently listened podcasts on Spotify, and that will give you a pretty good picture, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, nice. I think most people, at least in this circle, will know me for building a design studio for the last 4 years in Web3 and designing a lot of products for the ecosystem, like the ETH2 Launchpad or D-Hedge or Maple Finance or I don't know, there's 40 of them, but I'm not going to go through that list. But also reputation is something that's very hard to specify from the inside. It's more something that you usually get verified from the outside. But I guess we'll get to that later.
Thank you.
Yours.
I think for me, people always associate me with movement and traveling a lot. I think since I was very young, I haven't really stopped traveling. And the other day, my friend said something beautiful that she said, it feels like you're always like being driven by something that is beyond you. And I think I identify with that. And I feel, yeah, I feel like a passionate person, and maybe in the work environment, in this environment here, work, family, everything together. I think I'm a culture person.
All right. Thank you for sharing some of these more intimate details. And I'm not sure how much of this reputation that you feel you may have with people has correspondence in your online reputation, or kind of the systems that we're trying to build. And so that's part of the reflection that I guess we'd like to invite all of you to think about, when you connect with this, idea of let's build reputation systems and protocols. So since the idea here is to come at this issue from different angles, effectively it's about sharing how we think about this, building, designing it. So I guess the obvious question to start with, and I'd like to ask you, Andre, how do you think about reputation? Do you have a mental model for reputation?
Yeah, I think reputation in general is just the kind of verification of the ability to produce certain value for someone else. So if you think about doing work, or if you think about like creating value at a very specific point in time, let's say value is almost like your assumption that you can fulfill something that's incomplete in the future, then the reputation is like the other end of it, where someone else verifies that, yes, you're able to actually produce that value. And that can happen on a lot of different domains and a lot of different, in a lot of different ways. So you could either just literally do work, you can like create something out of like, you can build this table, you can say something nice, or you can, I don't know, create an experience or something, and move someone or something in your environment into a different place. And someone else will verify that, someone else will tell you, yes, you've done that, I appreciate that. And the storage of that over time is, I think, the reputation that you accrue. So, I mean, if you're a designer, it's like very easy because you just have your portfolio of projects. That's your work. That's your reputation. That's what other people can see and then draw conclusions of who you are and how they perceive you.
This is reputation right here.
There you go.
He's earning some.
Amazing.
All right, everyone. This is officially when we cheers,
Awesome.
To ETH Barcelona and everyone that has organized this great event.
Cheers.
Thank you for hosting it.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Salute. All right. Cheers. First row here coming through. Thank you. Anyone else feels like they want to share, how they think about reputation, and if there's like a specific, distinct way or mental model that they have in going about it?
I can share. I mean, I think it's a recipe for cooperation. It's basically like if you're contributing to society, if you're helping other people out, it's that idea that other people are going to want to work with you. It's not necessarily like taking a job because it pays a lot of money. It's like taking jobs because you feel like you're making an impact in the world, and making friends with people that you think are doing good things in the world. And I think that's ultimately, when we're thinking about building systems for reputation, it's more like modeling who do we know in the world who has good reputation, like that more qualitative aspect. What can we learn about their life, their decisions, their behaviors, and then how can we build systems that basically model how to enable more people to participate in that way.
Awesome. And by the way, what people know me for is the food sniper. Won't talk about that before, but it's not necessarily something that comes with my professional identity. And so I guess as we were saying, as we think about our own reputations, it could be that we have multiple identities, and certainly we now live increasingly in a space where that's legit, that's possible. And so as we look at these different identities, how do we curate reputations, for each of them? I mean, is it, where is the threshold, of our curation? How much could we omit or say about who we are? And I think that's kind of a theme that I'd like us to think about, and maybe we can reflect on a little bit. But so Ashley, since I've, on the hook here, so what are things that, say, Web3 brings about or enable that were not possible before that could help us build better reputation protocols or systems?
Yeah, I think it's just the transition of centralized reputation systems, right? You have governments that tell you that you're a certain type of person. You have credit rating agencies that tell you have a certain type of credit score, and they don't tell you all the details of how they're calculating that. We're breaking apart those systems. We're saying, let's open source the algorithms that we're using to determine this, and let's come up with better models. I don't think we're in a phase of coming up with the best model. I think we're in a phase of building the tools for everyone to experiment, to come up with better models, and to have conversations and test things and start to say, how could we design these things better? And ultimately, I think that's what it's about. It's about saying, what could we do if we were cooperating to build better systems, rather than looking for someone else to build the next best system for us.
Great, thank you. Arthur, let me put you on the spot here. So we've had a chat, and you shared a bit about your journey. And one thing that I wanted to focus on is so today in the, say, general academic environment, particularly the academic research environment, there's this sort of motto that has, that goes by, publish or perish, or get cited or die. I mean, that is a form of reputation that has been ingrained in how we share public research. I mean, do you have any thought around how could we, sort of take that as, how do we move away from that into kind of a better design for reputation systems?
Yeah, I have some thoughts, although I have to agree like 100% with everything that you said, Ashley, that I also think that these are early days, and it's really most important to encourage as many entrepreneurs and people who are excited about the space to just, experiment. But when it comes to some of my particular experiences in academia, I would actually try to be a little bit more positive, because yeah, for sure I could see what you just mentioned, that there were some areas and there were some groups of people that basically were kind of defining these metrics from themselves, which was like, hey, we are publishing this paper, why don't we I grew up in Poland where the higher education is free and it's subsidized by the government. So the way it worked in my case was that basically the institutes on the university, they would get together and they would figure, hey, we publish these papers together on our department. Why don't we explain to the government why it makes sense to give us finances based on the number of publications that we have in our own magazines and in the citations of our own group citing each other. So that was like a clearly negative for me case where a small group of people were coming up with their own metric and they were able to convince somebody who wasn't knowledgeable enough that it was a good idea. But I've also seen a lot of positive examples, I have to say, that especially, not surprisingly, among scientists who were more widely renowned with better reputation worldwide. And they were coming up with their own ways to basically share knowledge, share reputation with much broader circles, exchange students internationally. I know that you have some great experiences around that as well. But I did not necessarily see, but that was 20 years ago. I'm not sure how much has changed in this regard, but I did not necessarily see any mechanisms baked into the institutions that would actually support that. So it really relied on the fact that, some of the most successful scientists just realized somehow, hey, that we need to be more open, more transparent, we need to share more. So yeah, but still ultimately you could say that even in their case, they were using some of their kind of intrinsic rules that could even be more transparent using crypto and some of the products that are being built right now.
I think maybe as we're seeing the scientific community going into open science and now decentralized science, that's the issue of reputation for them is probably going to be as important. How do we rethink that system? And so I guess this is another realm in which reputation kind of has an impact, particularly around providing us with the good research that allows us then to build and design a new system. So that's clearly a reality. Go ahead.
I think there's something about that is who is the reputation issuer? And who are the institutions that provide legitimacy to the reputation that is being created? And I feel like we don't think so much about that, because then thinking about legitimacy is a whole rabbit hole in its own. But if a university, like, who has legitimacy now? It's like very few for most things, and how we go around in society. It's probably academia, the state, the church. Somehow, like for the majority of people, like the institutions that provide legitimacy to the reputation they are building. And that can be kind of a modular reputation, like someone that has reputation in the academia will probably have reputation in all of these other circles as well. And I think the challenge now is that the organizations we are creating, they're not coming from this legacy they don't have this legitimate perspective to the rest of the world yet, and not even to each other sometimes. Like, how do the projects we work on create reputation among each other for the reputation an individual have inside of them to be legitimate in the spaces where they circulate?
I think you just added a very important angle and sort of framing, where most of the time I feel when we think about reputation, we think about individual reputation, but you're introducing this idea, what makes an organization reputable, right? Which probably then ends up into governance land. And that's a whole different conversation. But for example, in the domain of education, there are, accrediting organizations that are, issuing credentials to a university to be legit, to be able to issue legit verifiable diplomas. And so, that reputations or Ivy League schools have their own way, or the rankings that already exist. So, but I think it's important to think about those two layers. It's individual reputation, which probably we spend most time thinking about, and the organizational reputation, which ends up into governance land.
Although, Simona, I have to say that I wonder if this is something that maybe we could actually, at least reduce this gap significantly with just more transparent rules of how reputation is acquired and issued, like you say, on blockchain or off blockchain. Because I guess that, one explanation of why we currently have these two levels is that basically, reputation is often emergent and is coming from particular pieces of work, particular contributions of some groups of people. Then they want to organize into bigger groups to be more effective. And then that groups often starts to kind of use the reputation of the founders, and sometimes it uses it in the right way, and the reputation is well deserved even like years and years later. Sometimes it kind of diverges. And I feel that sometimes this divergence may be caused by just lack of transparency and probably many other factors.
Well, I think you're talking about how to build systems to incentivize the values that we have. And ultimately, I think that's the question about reputation. It comes down to, if you think about it, like someone that you think has positive reputation in your life, it's because you have some shared values, or you admire that person. They embody some values that you aspire to. So I think like reputation is really a framework for us to start to think about, what do we want to incentivize? That's the reputation, right? And so now we're building systems where we're incentivizing people to start to participate in new ways. And I think that's what's really cool about starting to think about it in this way, rather than thinking about how do we like bring our real world credentials from the past onto the blockchain, because then we're based upon that old paradigm. Instead say, what do we want the paradigm to look like, build those systems, and create ways for people to participate and start to build reputation in that way.
Building up on that, I think the root is having reputation connected to reward systems. It feels like this triad of reputation, reward system, and identity, that they have to be all solid somehow for that to function well. Because if you're creating reputation without that being attached to the contributions you give, to the value you produce, then it's much harder for the reputation to be legitimate.
And that's like Facebook and Instagram today, right? It's like you can build reputation, but you have to do it within the context of this certain algorithmic world. So it's about breaking up that paradigm.
Yeah,
I'm going to go to you, Arthur. So Arthur has a past working at Facebook, right, and building, some systems around.
I mean, let's just say it.
What are some lessons learned?
I built identity verification for Facebook that is currently used on Instagram, WhatsApp, and in Facebook itself. Well, lots and lots of different learnings, of course. I think that ultimately, I was working on these systems for 3 years, and when I was quitting, I felt that, maybe 5% of the work was done, of the significant work from my perspective. I personally can say that, I am more interested, and I would encourage more systems like with similar kind of like specification to VCs, virtual credentials, like ways of how you can share your reputation without sharing your identity. At Facebook, by definition, it's kind of impossible because the terms of service actually require you to give your legal first and last name. And of course, like as a side note, we can mention that it's not even possible in many places on Earth, of course, as many of you know here. But regardless of this, we've been focusing, we have been very successful at Facebook, at scaling and simplifying identity verification for lots and lots of people in the understanding of the company, what was useful for the company. And of course, I'm not speaking for the company, not mean to mention that, but the way I understood that was that we wanted to make the existing ways of verifying identity, which were mostly based on data shared by your friends and also by asking people to share their identity documents. We wanted to make these as useful and as frictionless for people as possible, so that it would be more difficult for others to steal their accounts, and when somebody steals your account, it's easier for you to recover this account. So for me, it's just like at the very, very, very tip of the iceberg, and it's not necessarily anything I would even start thinking about when I if I would building my own reputation system on Web3. I would definitely not in the first, second, or fifth step start thinking about, ask people for their identity documents. But what I can say that I definitely have learned is that, and what we have been trying to also leverage in many use cases is that, those signals from your community, from the groups you participate in, are extremely important and significant, and they can be really helpful in many use cases. But the challenge there was that it was very difficult basically to label and to qualify them. So in this more qualitative cases that you mentioned in the beginning, to me the problem is really how and who and in what way, using what mechanisms should label this data as relevant or irrelevant. Should it be done per use case, maybe like you mentioned, Andre, in the beginning, or should it be based on some values, because there needs to be there is a factor of judgment in this as well. And to me, this is like a level of complication that is probably like 2 or 3 levels beyond the stage we are at right now in Web3. But I do hope that at some point, if we build this nice, transparent, strong foundations, we can go to a point where we can start doing similar things as well. Because I do believe that this kind of social proof-based data, qualitative data, and signals can also be very useful in many cases.
And if it's transparent, you're obviously also kind of allowing or enabling other people, or more people, to verify someone else's reputation, or basically in Facebook or something, you have an organization. It's a very centralized place for verifying someone's skills or someone's reputation, but in reality, it's just like a community. People just know each other, and so if the data was more transparent, then everybody could say like, okay, I verify that you're good at something, or like, and it becomes more an interpersonal relationship, like an intersubjective relationship, rather than like a top-down judgment.
I think it's a fantastic call from my perspective. Like to give an example, let's say I love basketball person in my personal life. Let's say you have a group on Facebook of basketball enthusiasts in London, where I live, and let's say that somebody tells about me that I'm a good team player in that group, and let's say that some centralized entity like Facebook tried to assess the value. Like, does this guy is the person saying truth, or are they lying? Maybe it's sarcastic, they don't know. But this group knows because they know me, right? So decentralizing this and just, in a way, if you have this is basically that, these two pictures about like a centralized network and decentralized. If you always need to go through the center, there's also a lot of data lost, right? So I also personally believe that maybe in many cases starting with really empowering local use cases and local groups and letting them emerge with this way to assess reputation and start building on that might be very useful.
Well, and there's a fundamental principle there, which is that people in the real world actually make a lot of decisions based around reputation. It's actually something we're like innately trained to do because we're social beings. So I think it's like finding out like how are we interacting in the real world, and like do we need to build these like really complicated systems where we're trying to give like points to each interaction, or is it more of like a threshold basis? Like if you do X, Y, Z, like you contribute to the community in these certain ways, there's some data that's associated to that, then you get access to these benefits of the community. It doesn't have to be so complicated. I think the complication can emerge, but we start with really the foundations and the basics, and then we let those systems emerge on top of that. I think over-designing it is where we get into the more degenerate behaviors, because people are probably trying to do good, but they're actually like thinking too much and not really like allowing things to emerge socially how we would if we just had a better system.
I think that works really well if it's just for one community, but then it has a limitation if you want to use that reputation for transiting around multiple projects, communities, which I think it's such an interesting challenge now, how to create more collaboration between DAOs and how to lower the cost of onboarding and of making people understand how to contribute in the space. So if they are mapped in a social context, that position in the map is visible not only for them, but for other contributors. And they could use that to navigate more easily and to make collaboration more seamless. I think that would be great.
Well, it's also related to the position in the actual organization, because then the reputation of that community counts, not just like your personal reputation. Like, sure, you've done this part, like you've done well, and someone else might look at you, but in the context of the organization, then it's like the combination of you relative to the reputation of the entire organization that someone else is going to pick up on and be like, okay, you're part of Common Stack. We know the value, the reputation of Common Stack. This is what you did. Okay, now it makes sense. Now I see what eventually the value you're producing through the chain of events.
Exactly. It's all context
Right.
based.
And then you can look at like also different communities merging. Then you say like, okay, so well, who was actually contributing to that merged, collaboration? And then it's not just like, hey, person A from DAO or organization 1 and person B from organization 2, but it's like, okay, it's like exactly on that intersection with this team of people. This is the context in which that reputation is actually created as part of like teamwork or whatever then, and then that becomes part of what people can kind of show and carry around. But obviously it's all still up for misinterpretation. That's always possible.
So we are starting to look at some other issues, like context is a big one. And as you mentioned, and if you can think of context in about your own individual reputation, I mean, you could be a great CEO, but a bad father. I mean, but that's still kind of in your reputation, and resolving for that is one of the challenges. But across context, the issue of portability is key. I mean, we live in a time with an increasing abundance of data points that we can collect. So it's probably the data is available. It's noisy, right? But it's really that the data layer is there, but it's at the interpretation layer that we start to get into things that could go wrong. And so maybe the way that we want to approach that is making that transparent, as you were saying, and it's really where reputation is probably built at that layer. I don't know if there is, like, in the work that you're currently doing, I mean, have you been looking at sort of keeping in mind what could go wrong with reputation, and how are you designing for that or against it? I mean, are you taking specific approaches? I mean, how do you think about this, and how does this impact kind of your work every day?
I can take that. I mean, I think I start with like what's wrong with reputation today, and I think the blockchain industry at its best is attempting to address that. It's saying there's a lot of people excluded from the financial system here, like in Western countries, but also around the world. And I think that's the biggest failure of reputation that we have at scale. And I think that's the biggest problem to solve, is how do we create systems that we can enable more access for people to build wealth? And as part of that, reputation, obviously the old systems and the old models that we have don't work. It's why I'm not the biggest fan of saying, oh, just put your credit score on the blockchain and there you can get a loan. Like, what did we change there? We didn't fundamentally change the systems of how we're issuing credit. So I think that's the biggest opportunity for the blockchain space. How does it go wrong? I mean, of course, you can see how it goes wrong. Like, that was kind of the more benign example of how it goes wrong. I think it goes wrong by us treating this as like another attempt of us to build the system to better other people, rather than saying, here are tools for other people to start to build new systems. And I think that is the biggest issue with the space today, is like we haven't yet grasped, who are we? Like, are we that open source community, or are we this like new fintech bubble? And I think that's fundamentally the nature of why reputation is so important.
I guess, and just this is kind of makes me think about how Evan from Disco thinks about how do you introduce yourself to people right now in the crypto space. Often it's like with your wallet, or with your financial transaction, but is that your reputation really? Maybe that's just part of your identity. So I guess we need to be able to be more articulate and expansive when we think about reputation, and maybe we're getting there just out of this just financial space into more social one. Livia, do you have any thought? How does reputation trickle into your kind of work?
How can it go wrong?
Yeah. What is the impact of reputation? Like, often it's more wrong than good.
I think something that could go, I don't know if, well, in the brief conversation with Evan today, she said they are working on solving this, but how can it be fluid? Like, how can your reputation not be stuck with you? And we change all the time, and I think embracing change is a big value of our communities. So how could we translate that into the tech of it and make it work? But then something we talked yesterday that is a challenge about that is like, oh, but what if you did something really bad that like people should know about it? Like, well, what if someone, I don't know, committed a crime that somehow was attached to them, but then are there things that you have the choice to change and things you don't have the choice to change? Or even if someone committed a crime, is there some type of forgiveness a metric or like parameter that could be added to the mix? And maybe this is a more deep into like society-based kind of thing, but even with codes of conduct that we have in our communities, how do we deal with negative behavior, would that be part of a sanction somehow?
It's fundamentally, I think, you're also introducing this, notion of, how do we deal with consent? Where does the agency of an individual end in terms of sharing your reputation, making it public? Things like your criminal record, should be able to be public or accessible. You should not be able to hide that. But, where do we draw that line between public and private, on-chain, off-chain? I think that's, a major debate that, where reputation is just part of it, and maybe it rolls up to identity, and that's maybe the space where it's been talked more about. But it's certainly, how do you design a system that has that flexibility, honors, the agency of a person, but at the same time, is not, it doesn't degenerate into you hiding information that should be known. Any thought on consent, agencies around, individual owning their reputations?
It's tricky. People should always decide on what they want to share and what they don't want to share, but at the same time, you kind of need as much transparency as possible from the, data on the blockchain is also like fully transparent, but it's like you essentially who decides on whether you want to connect that to your identity or not. I think also like in terms of danger, it's also something that's kind of a sign for being very early in that development, is that you can still, well, as an individual, just come to danger or like into generally a physically dangerous place if you share too much about something about yourself. Like share that you're from Russia in the wrong circle, and that is going to be problematic. And that again is like, okay, so maybe the issue is also in the interpretation of the reputation, because maybe then it's about saying, well, maybe there is nothing negative. Maybe we're just like creating constantly a storage of like a collective memory, and it's cool that it all exists, and then as long as we can make sure that nobody misinterprets it, that's fine. Because yeah, it's like in one community your activity might be negative, but in another community it's like that's the best thing you could have done. So these things we also have to take into consideration, and
I think that, again, we haven't aligned before this panel, but again, I will say that I think I agree with you, if I understood correctly, that it's such a, like, we need to start somewhere, right? And it's such a broad topic that I think that, really, like, we have so much knowledge about what is going wrong with the current reputation systems that we should really maybe just start focusing on how to significantly improve these problems, which are basically plutarchy, lack of transparency, lack of access to certain institutions, lack of knowledge. Like, we can discuss for the whole day if I should be able to decide what I share or not, but the truth is that nowadays I have no idea what I'm sharing even, right? So how about we start addressing this maybe, and then we will learn as we go a little bit more about, particular use cases, because again, like, using a little bit of my experience from Facebook, there is like hundreds, thousands of use cases where there are basically all of the configurations about somebody wanting to share something for good reasons, wanting to share something for bad reasons, and vice versa. It's just extremely complicated. So I agree that starting with local, like, smaller use cases, empowering people to solve problems that they have based on bad experiences that they have, is probably something that we should be focusing on over the next couple of years.
No. So, where do you start? Like, are there either low-hanging fruits that you are either working on or you think, are there for us to address? Or imagine you had, like, a magic lamp and you had 3 wishes. I mean, what would be like the 3 things that, should need to be solved now? So it's either pick one, either, long-hanging fruits, or, you have a wish. Ashley.
I think it's credit. Like, I've said that before, but basically, how do we enable more people to start to build wealth? I think that's the biggest question. A lot of people are just disenfranchised from day one, and that doesn't have to be the case. I think in terms of reputation systems, what we're thinking about is how do we coordinate our resources and our skills more cooperatively rather than just using our labor power to work at like giant corporations that aren't necessarily serving us. And I think that that's fundamentally where we can start to shift things, because a lot of people actually want to contribute to their community. They want to like take care of themselves better. They just can't. They don't have the access to do that. So if we build systems that say, hey, if you participate in this way, you're earning this currency, and that's essentially what we do at Resource, you can use that currency now to spend back at things that are good for you and good for your local community. So that's the thing that I think is both low-hanging fruit and both most systemic.
I think that, yeah, I agree. Like from the kind of known existing use cases, I think that credit and enabling more people to build wealth and start decreasing the gap is like extremely important. On a slightly higher level, I would say that I would really like to start seeing products kind of showing how reputation can be useful online, because right now I believe that the majority of or maybe I don't want to judge, but a significant part of time, a lot of people spend on social media, and I feel that this is like how we think about online reputation, basically, how many likes you have, how many followers you have right now. And there are many known problems with this, of course, and the truth is that, when it comes to the current so-called creator economy, like a super small slice of the creators can make a living, and effectively everybody else is kind of just lost time, right? So I'm also extremely passionate about cases where we can, I believe in creators economy, but such that where the barrier of creation, it's easier for me to find content that is basically more relevant to me, and I need better reputation systems, for example, in this case, to be able, because right now what I have is YouTube recommendations or something like that, right? So I personally also feel that for me, this is another super interesting area, and I would like to see some new products doing well.
Yeah. Make a wish, Andre.
Well, I'm obviously biased because I'm also working on that kind of tools, or I guess that kind of ontology. I think that the lowest hanging fruit is to start, well, it's actually no longer low-hanging fruit. My perspective on it is that we just need to look at our work and what we do as the source of the reputation, and then kind of start from the inside. So rather than kind of trying to build top-down systems that track reputation, assume that how we individually want to work with our reputation, and then observe how we do that, and then try to make that accessible. And again, I'm just more or less, I guess, describing of what I perceive already works in the organization that I'm building, or what people are kind of happy with. But I think a lot of the reputation issues have to come from the inside, from people actually doing work and then deciding what they do with it. And then we can use technology to automate the distribution or the shareability of it. I see it actually very similar to, like, as you just mentioned, like Instagram or social media. It's like, it's also reputation, the messages, the pictures that you send, and it's just people who want to do the stuff. So like, they want to share to their friends, and that is reputation. So the next stage, I think, is more around, well, let's do that with work. You want to do work, do the work. You want to share with people that you've done it, and then we just need like platforms to make that visible.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that, and I would add that on top of like being based on people's work, also being based on the ways people relate with each other, because building, the ways in which relationships happen in a community is so important to the value they're adding, and also to have value diversification. Like, the more values we can map the more we could diversify the legitimacy layer also, like having more entities that can offer legitimacy and having more values that are considered reputable and yeah, in the big spectrum of being a whole human being, not just what I produce, but also who I am, how I behave, how I treat people, and how I treat myself. And
yeah, maybe what I'm hearing is that, although we have an abundance of, signals right now, these signals are weak today. How can we make them richer, right? And how can we make these signals more sort of bidirectional? So we let the machine kind of, crunch the data, but can we provide more recognition? So could we be more intentional in feeding good, rich data feedback to the machine so that ultimately even that interpretation layer, comes on course corrects itself? But this is an active, intentional responsibility of us. How do we kind of feed the machine the right things? And so being open about recognition, providing more feedback, that is just not an act of gratitude in respect to someone, but it ends up, becoming, the reputation protocol. So maybe, that means take a more active part, try to, turn this into a more human thing, which possibly could be more regenerative in respect to what we have today. And, I think that's kind of a way for us to wrap. I think, we went through kind of a different spectrum of angles onto this. Love the conversation. Grateful for all the work that you are doing, everyone is doing here. Great to have been on this stage, barefoot with you, and with some beers offered by the first row. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, ETH Barcelona.